The silence of the terminal's exclusive inner sanctum was a curated, expensive luxury designed to muffle the chaos of the world outside. Within these soundproof walls, power didn't need to raise its voice. It simply occupied the space. The pre-dawn light over the Chicago skyline was filtered through a heavy charcoal mist that clung to the glass of the Aero Lounge. Inside, the atmosphere was a blend of high-end, roasting beans and the polished scent of ancient mahogany. In a deep emerald-colored chair tucked away from the main traffic, Clara Vance was a study in contrast to the casual eye. She was just another college student dressed in a simple, unbranded pink top that looked like it had been washed a dozen times, her legs crossed in dark leggings, and her feet encased in battered canvas sneakers. A messy bun sat precariously atop her head, as she focused intently on a notebook, her pen flying across the page. To map out the intricate schematics of a micro-turbine, she looked like a stowaway in a kingdom of suits. However, the staff moved around her with a deference, usually reserved for heads of state. They had seen the heavy matte black card she'd used at the entrance, an invitation-only credential that bore the Vance crest. In the world of global logistics and heavy industry, the name Vance was synonymous with the very foundations of the modern economy. Miss Vance, a steward whispered, bowing slightly. Your boarding sequence for the Geneva flight has commenced. We've cleared the private corridor for your transit. Clara looked up, a genuine dimpled smile breaking through her focus. Thanks, Julian. I'll be right there. She slung a nondescript weathered backpack over her shoulder. It looked like something from a thrift store, but the fabric was a proprietary weave designed for extreme durability. Her father, the formidable Elias Vance, had insisted on a summer of labor at the family's European engineering hub. The terms were clear. She would live on a junior technician's salary and work the floor. But for the sake of security, her transit would be handled within the family's high-security travel protocols. Clara moved through the jet bridge and into the nose of the aircraft. Cabin 1A was a masterpiece of carbon fiber and Italian leather, a self-contained sanctuary with a sliding door and panoramic views. She settled in, kicked off her shoes, and prepared for 10 hours of blissful isolation. The serenity lasted until the arrival of the storm. This is fundamentally unacceptable. I have a specific affinity for the portside vista. My assistant was very clear about the seating requirements. The voice was sharp, brittle, and carried the weight of a woman used to getting her way through sheer volume. Entering the cabin was Helena Montgomery, a high-octane branding executive whose outfit was a curated armor of designer labels. Her sunglasses were large enough to hide her face, and her jewelry rattled like a warning signal. Behind her, a young flight attendant named Leo looked as though he were walking toward a firing squad. Ma'am, please? Leo pleaded softly. The cabin is fully booked. Seat 1K is virtually identical. I don't do virtually, Helena snapped, stopping dead at the entrance to Clara's suite. Her eyes raked over the plain pink top and the scuffed sneakers resting on the ottoman. Her expression curdled into one of pure, unadulterated snobbery. Leo, explain this. Why is a vagrant occupying a premier suite? This isn't a dormitory. Clara lowered her notebook, her expression calm but her pulse quickening. Is there a problem? The problem is your presence, said, her voice dripping with condescension. This section is reserved for people who contribute to the GDP, not for children playing with their parents. Reward points. You are an ISO. Get up 1K is more your speed or perhaps economy. Clara remembered her father's favorite adage, the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. She met Helena's gaze with a steady, unblinking stare. I'm in the seat I purchased. I'm staying put. Helena's jaw tightened. She turned to Leo, her voice rising. Verify her ticket now. I suspect a system error or a fraudulent boarding. No one dressed in a thrift store pink shirt pays for a first-class suite. Leo, sweating under the pressure, checked his tablet. His eyes darted from the screen to Clara. The ticket is valid, Miss Montgomery. It's a full-fare top-tier booking. There's no mistake. Helena leaned over the partition, cloying and aggressive. Listen to me, you little brat. You don't belong here. You're a stain on the experience. If you had any dignity, you'd move. I suggest you take your seat before you make an even bigger scene, Clara replied, clicking her noise-canceling headphones into place. Helena looked as though she might explode. She threw her bag into 1K with a violent thud. Fine, but I'm not done with you. I'm going to ensure the airline knows exactly what kind of riff-raff they're letting into the forward cabin. As the plane began its slow trek toward the runway, Elena wasn't looking at the safety video. She was a woman possessed, her thumbs flying across her phone screen. She began crafting a digital fiction, tagging the airline's corporate headquarters, and several prominent travel influencers, appalled by the lack of security on Flight 82. A passenger in 1A is showing signs of extreme instability and is being verbally abusive to the staff. I feel genuinely threatened. Why is this being ignored? Hashtag passenger safety. #crisis. At 30,000 feet she hit post, and then began hammering the flight attendant call button. With rhythmic intensity, a lead purser named Sophia arrived, her face tight with worry. The cockpit had just received an urgent message from ground security regarding a high-profile complaint on board. "Miss Montgomery, how can I help that girl?" Helena pointed a manicured finger. Clara just threatened me. She told me she had something dangerous in her bag, and that I'd be sorry if I didn't shut up. She's clearly under the influence of something. Look at her eyes. Clara pulled her headphones down, her face pale with shock. "I haven't said a word to you since we left the gate." "You're making this up. She's lying." "To save herself," Helena shouted, standing up to draw the attention of the other passengers. "I'm a Platinum Elite member. If I say I'm in danger, you have a legal obligation to act." The aircraft came to a jarring halt on the taxiway. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed to hold our position for a security matter. In the cabin, we apologize for the delay." Clara felt a cold shiver of humiliation. The entire plane was stopping because of a lie. Helena smirked, leaning back in her seat. "The world doesn't work for people like you, honey. It works for people like me." 10 minutes later, the cabin door was cycled open. A pair of uniformed airport police and a hurried-looking terminal manager stepped onto the plush carpet. They marched directly to Clara. "Miss, we need you to step off the aircraft immediately. Bring all your belongings," the senior officer commanded. "She's lying," Clara said, her voice trembling but her spirit holding firm. "She's been harassing me since the moment she boarded." "Check the cabin cameras. We'll discuss that in the precinct," the officer replied, his tone dismissive. "The captain has authorized your removal." "Let's go now." As Clara was marched out of the cabin, Helena called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Perhaps a bus ticket would be more appropriate for your next trip. They don't have dress codes there." Standing in the sterile fluorescent-lit jet bridge, the weight of the injustice finally hit Clara, but as the tears threatened to fall, she felt a familiar spark of Vance iron. She pulled out her phone and opened a dedicated, encrypted communication line. It was answered on the first ring. "Clara, you're showing a stationary on the tarmac." "What's the status?" Elias Vance's voice was like a low rumble of thunder, calm yet carrying an immense hidden power. "Dad," Clara whispered, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I've been removed from the flight. A passenger fabricated a story because she wanted my seat, and the airline took her side. Security is taking me into custody." The silence on the other end was more terrifying than a shout. "Who is the officer in charge?" "I'm handing the phone to him now." Clara stepped in front of the lead officer. "My father wants to speak with you." The officer sighed, looking at his watch. "Kid, I don't care about your—" "Take the phone," Clara said. Her voice had lost its teenage tremor. It was now cold, precise, and authoritative. The officer, startled by the sudden shift in her aura, took the device. "Officer Miller speaking." He listened for 10 seconds. His face went through a rapid transformation, from annoyance to confusion, then to a sickly pale shade of gray. "Yes, sir, I understand I didn't have the full context." "No, sir. We will wait right here. My apologies, sir." He handed the phone back as if it were an unexploded bomb. "What's the holdup?" the terminal manager demanded. "We need to clear this girl so we can get the flight back in the air." "We aren't doing anything," Miller whispered, his voice cracking. "We are staying exactly where we are." "On whose authority?" "The man who just told me he owns the runway we're standing on," Miller replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "And he's landing his private transport in 5 minutes. He told me that if his daughter is moved 1 inch further, he'll buy the airline just to fire everyone in this hallway." Back on the plane, Helena Montgomery was sipping a celebratory glass of sparkling water. Finally, she told the passenger across the aisle, "Some peace and quiet now that the riff-raff is gone." Suddenly, the engines hummed and the plane began a slow, awkward U-turn. The pilot's voice sounded strangled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are returning to the gate." Due to an unprecedented administrative directive, Helena was incensed. She began buzzing the attendant again. "This is absurd. I have a keynote in Geneva. I will have someone's job for this." She looked out the window and saw a phalanx of black, armored SUVs racing across the tarmac, LED by a sleek midnight blue Gulfstream that had just touched down on the auxiliary strip. The vehicles didn't stop at the terminal. They swarmed the gate. The doors to the holding area burst open. Elias Vance stepped into the room. He was a mountain of a man in a bespoke navy suit, radiating a level of influence that made the air feel heavy. He ignored the officials and went straight to Clara, checking her for any signs of distress. "Are you all right, Clara?" "I'm okay, Dad, but they treated me like a criminal because of what she said." Elias turned slowly. He looked at the terminal manager, who looked as though he wanted to melt into the floorboards. "I am Elias Vance, I understand. You decided to bypass all protocols and ignore the footage on this aircraft to satisfy the whims of a social climber." "Sir, we were following the safety reports." "I have just contacted the board of this airline," Elias said, his voice a low, lethal silk. "I have informed them that their safety protocols are a liability. I'm calling in the debt on their entire fleet of 7. 8 sevens as of this moment. You are currently standing on a plane that, for all intents and purposes, no longer has a lease to fly. And as for your employment, I'd suggest you start updating your resume before you leave this building. Elias turned to the legal team that had followed him in. Initiate a defamation suit against the passenger in 1K and find out which firm employs her. I want a meeting with their primary shareholders. By noon, Elias walked Clara back onto the plane. The silence in the cabin was absolute as they entered. Helen Montgomery was standing in the aisle, her face a mask of confusion and growing terror. When she saw Elias, she knew the face. She had spent her career trying to get into the same rooms as men like him. Mr. Vance, she stammered, her voice high and thin there. There was a misunderstanding. I was just worried about the security of the cabin. You weren't worried about security, Elias said, looking through her as if she were made of glass. You were worried about your own vanity. You saw a girl in a thin pink top and decided she was beneath you. You tried to ruin a young woman's life. To get a better view, he looked at the purser. Is there a seat available in the very last row? The one near the lavatories? Yes, Mr. Vance, 52B. It's a middle seat with a broken recline. Elias looked at Helena. You have 2 paths today. You can be escorted off this plane by the officers waiting at the door and charged with filing a false police report and public endangerment. Or you can take seat 52B and remain there for the duration of the flight if you choose the latter. I might wait 48 hours before I ruin your derriere. Helena looked at the handcuffs glinting on Officer Miller's belt. She looked at the other passengers who were now filming her with their phones. The woman who had demanded the world cater to her every whim began the long, agonizing walk of shame toward the back of the plane. She was forced to squeeze past the people she had looked down upon, her designer heels clicking hollowly on the floor. She spent the flight wedged between a restless toddler and a passenger with a persistent cough. Her luggage was removed and sent to a different continent by mistake. By the time the plane touched down in Geneva, her company's stock had dipped on the news of a massive legal filing, and her phone was flooded with a termination notice. Clara sat back in her suite and reopened her notebook. She sketched a final detail on her turbine. A small hidden structural support,